We can start now. Thank you so much for this invitation. It's a great honor, and I'm always happy to see a few friends and familiar faces. Today, it's not going to be a very traditional meta-research talk, but it is in an area where I think it might be desirable to play a more important role in meta-research and in active actual original research in the area of what determines trust in science. And this is an experimental work. This is going to be presentation of an experiment, or I might say a series of experiments, joint work with Theo Alisandratos, Aris Boukuras, Sotiris Georganas, and myself. So the big question that we are addressing is how the current changes in the landscape of information affect the way that expertise and authority is viewed in the world. Traditionally, you would have very limited ways in which people could share knowledge, and knowledge was limited enough that you would even define the concept of a polymath or a universal genius who would be able to master knowledge. Of course, this is far distance past by now. The modern landscape can be more characterized by people who are very specialized, and some of us can hardly tie our shoelaces, and therefore it is interesting to ask the question of in this new landscape, where interaction takes place to a large degree online, as actually we are doing now, and via the social media, when opinions are presented out there, can people identify the amount of expertise of people who express opinions? Can people really tell, especially lay people in a given domain, can they tell who is the expert and who is not? And when you have two people showing up juxtaposed in a social media environment, can you tell which one of the two is the expert by viewing their appearance and their especially their views alone? So let us define more carefully the research question after defining two important concepts. So experts can be viewed as people who dedicate their lives into understanding a topic very deeply. Okay, one could think, we have been also commented on this paper, that one way to view our experts in this project would be also as representatives in some sense, people who are engaged in a long-run relationship, such as with the public, and they serve them, such as politicians, accountants, doctors, educators, and so on and so forth. So on the one side, there are those experts who understand the topic deeply, and they can inform lay people. On the other hand, you might have people such as charlatans or populists. In previous versions of the project, we used to call one of the parties a charlatan, but now we switch it to populist, and we will see if it is a preferable term. So a populist can be defined as someone who tells people what they want to hear, rather than what is objectively, or at least to the scientific consensus, correct. Okay, so here is our main question, as I'm going to rephrase what I was talking about before. When you're in an environment with increasing sources of information, and especially drawn from the online environment, okay, where you have those expressions not immediately obvious, okay, so when you only observe the views expressed on a certain topic, okay, when you don't have other forms of credentials, body language or other signals that would tell you which one is an expert and which one is not. Okay, so when you are merely based on the views on a topic, can you tell who is an expert and who is not, who is an expert and who is a layperson or even a populist, as we will see? Okay, and why is this so important? Well, it's connected to the idea of who attracts attention, who becomes influential, and who people heed, who people pay attention to. And ultimately, all of us should have suspected this by now. So this is going to be the ancient Greek quote, as my friends like to say, in a project with so many Greek names, you should have this, which is the Greek saying, "Τότε έφη τας πόλης απόλυστε, όταν μη δίνονται τους φαύλους από των σπουδαίων διακρίνην." Namely, states fail when they cannot distinguish fools from serious men or great men. So this is the big question. Are things becoming more difficult for modern societies to distinguish between the two? And therefore, we have all sorts of potential issues related to this. But apart from the obvious importance for society and democracy, it's important to clarify a little bit in this audience, why would such a research question matter for meta-research? Okay, so as we view it, the ultimate objective of meta-research is to study what makes science and the process of scientific knowledge both reliable, but also useful for informing and changing society. Okay, so as meta-research has shown, we might have periods whereby the generation and the accumulation of scientific process might not be very smooth. Okay, there might be concerns about this accumulation process. There might be concerns about the public trust for science. And currently we're living in a period with multiple crises, and of course with the corona crisis there were certain challenges. Actually, I was speaking to a visitor that we are having from Germany, a psychologist, and he says that sometimes people call him from newspapers and they want to hear something very concrete. So the other day they were calling him and saying, is it true that people no longer trust science? He said, no. Okay. I guess they go to the next one. So it is becoming a little bit of an important question, and meta research, being the interdisciplinary domain that studies the accumulation process for science, is particularly well suited to study and address concerns about determinants of public trust for science. And of course, how people ultimately utilize the end product of science depends on how they manage to choose whom to heed and selecting the appropriate sources. Okay, of course, to some degree, this depends on centralized decisions of politicians and formal education, and in individual decisions of people where to look for advice. And recently, John Ioannidis shared some news about a particular endeavor to generate a new center by the Nobel Prize winner Donna Strickland, who would be taking up the objective of dealing with the problem of scientific misinformation. So this is just one instance, one example why such an endeavor would be an integral part of meta research, or should be. Okay, so now let's go and speak about the particular focus of this paper. So this is a general question as I presented it. I will be narrowing this down to the domain of our own expertise in this paper, which is economic science. But the results are going to be of relevance for science in general. It's just a particular application. It's not just applicable, however, for economics. So first of all, we will be focusing on a questionnaire of applied economic issues, okay? And we will be focusing also on an environment, as I was explaining to you before, purely an online environment where the only kind of information that can be shared is the views of different parties on economic issues. So we will be abstracting from a series of dimensions that have been studied in economics and other disciplines quite substantially, such as credentials, demonstrable skills, competition between advisors, the issues of conflicts of interest, the issue of the identity of advisors, body language, and so on and so forth. So we're not going to get too much into this discussion, but we believe the environment that we will tackle fits very well with much of modern communication via the social media. So what do? We develop, first of all, a theoretical benchmark of what people should be doing in terms of choosing advisors to answer on particular economic topics, okay? So we have developed in a previous paper an economic questionnaire, okay, with a correct answer and a wrong answer. So the job of the advisors will be to suggest answers for our participants in the experiment, okay? So our participants are going to be viewing the questionnaire, they will be answering the questionnaire themselves, and then they will be viewing suggestions by two different advisors. Their task will be to identify which one of the two advisors is the expert, who always provides the correct answer according to academic consensus of what academic economists believe, and who is a non-expert. Roughly speaking, this is going to be what we're going to be doing. And to anticipate the outcomes, unfortunately, when the non-expert is a populist who does specifically target answers that tell people what they want to hear, unfortunately, what we find is that the populist consistently outperforms the expert in terms of popularity. So that's the big result that we have, and we will see the details of what we do. So our experiments will be online, but incentivized. So people will be earning real money when they answer the questions sequentially correct, but more importantly, when they choose the appropriate advisor, namely the expert. So a few things that I'm sure that many of you want to see. So the first is, how do we define expertise, or how do we define correct answers? So again, we have a questionnaire. You're going to get a flavor of the type of questions we're asking. I'm going to give you a few examples. They're questions of economic expertise. So the first thing that we do, how do we determine what is a correct answer? By academic consensus. We go to academic departments from the US and Europe. We let them answer our questionnaire. And then if there is comprehensive agreement on the correct answer, at least 70% agreement, we select a question as having a correct answer, okay, with enough consensus. Questions that have not passed this level of agreement, we left outside, okay? So how do we have a questionnaire. How do we define a correct answer? In total, 10 questions, those from which the academic consensus says that they are correct, okay? And now is the first advisor of our experiment. Those advisors are actually going to be pre-specified algorithms. They're not going to be real humans. The expert is simply someone who always suggests the correct answer. So the correct answer as defined now by academic consensus. So that's our first advisor, the expert, and we were going to have them capitalized. Secondly, who is going to be the second advisor here? The second advisor is going to be an algorithm who chooses the most popular answer that the public is likely to answer, that the public is likely to give. How do we determine that? The answer is using a pilot study from the same sample frame as our actual experiments. So we did a pilot with 120 participants. We used Prolific Academic, the platform, the online platform. We chose relatively representative samples from England and Wales. And our second advisor in our main experiment, the Populist, always provides the answer that the modal, which is the modal answer in our pilot, the answer that most lay people chose. Okay, the expert gives the answer that the academic consensus provides. Okay, it turns out, not by construction, that the Populist gives 4 correct out of the total of 10 questions. So the expert has 10 out of 10, the Populist has 4 out of 10. So again, this is the design. It's really simple. First, we ask people, we give them the questionnaire. Very soon you're going to be confronted with a question yourselves. We ask them to answer the questionnaire. After each answer that they record, we give them the recommendation of the 2 advisors. Okay, it doesn't really matter that they're not real human beings because we provide them full information, as you will see in a second. Okay, and we ask them to identify who is who. Okay, so then we just give them a review. Those were the questions. Those were your answers. Those were the recommendations by advisor J. Okay, it's just an index. It's just a name. These are the recommendations by advisor M. So after seeing those, whom do you consider as the expert? Actually, we don't ask this question directly in the tradition of economics. We just have an approach of revealed preference. Which one do you choose to answer the questionnaire again on your behalf? And for each correct answer, you're going to be paid real money. Okay? And in this process, participants have full information. They know that one of the advisors, they don't know who of J or M, is an expert who always has, is an advisor. We don't use the name expert in the experiment, who always provides the correct answer. The other one is an advisor that chooses the most popular answer from a pre-study. They know that, and that they have only 10 out of 10 correct questions. Participants know that, but they don't know who is who. Okay. And on top of this, just to close our model, because we have a formal model, I think we're not going to have much time to go into that, and it's not so important. We also tell them in the end the relative frequency of the model answer in the pre-study. Okay, so they know that in our pilot with similar people, the most popular answer received, let's say, 82% of people chose it at, let's say, 82%. Okay, so they have full information. And here it goes. So this is one of the most interesting questions in our questionnaire. For people who are familiar with economics and they take a little bit of a step back to think about the meaning of the question, it's a relatively simple question. For people who are not in an economic mode of thinking, it can be particularly complex. So there's a country, rich land, in which at first you have no value-added tax, no VAT imposed on fruits. The price of a kilo of apples is 100 pounds. The government is thinking of imposing a VAT of 24% on all fruits. What will be the price of apples after the market adjusts to the tax? That's the trick. So all that someone inclined in thinking in economics terms would consider is that the answer depends on the slope of demand and supply. Okay, you have a shift in those curves, and some part of the tax will be a burden for consumers, but the producer will also take some part of the tax depending on the slope of demand and supply. But what is going to be pretty clear is that not the whole amount of the tax is gonna go on the consumer. So the correct answer is between 100 and 124, but people who are not inclined to think like that overwhelmingly, as in our results, tend to give the wrong answer. So after we put them a question, in order to estimate our model, we also elicit their confidence in their answer. Okay, so this is what happens in the remaining of the screen. It's just an elicitation of confidence from 0 to 100 in terms of their answer. Okay. So then, in order to show fully what happens, we repeat the screen with the question and the possible answers. Okay, now they have answered the question already. So it's just a review. And now they see recommendations by the two advisors. Advisor J recommends A. Advisor M recommends B. That's what happens basically in all 10 questions in part 1 of our study. Okay, and finally, they're informed about the fraction of respondents in the pre-study that gave the most popular answer. So, in the end, in stage 2, the important choice, they are given a review of what happened in stage 1, what they chose as the answer to the question, what the advisors M and J chose as answers to the question, okay? And additional information, it's just a review. Those are all reminders, the confidence in their answers and the fraction that shows the most popular answer in the pre-study. And then is the basic question, who do they choose to answer the question on their behalf? Who do they view as the expert if they want to maximize their money, or if they have any incentives to be correct, they ought to be choosing the one that they think is the expert among M and J at this stage. Okay, so in total, and for good reasons, as we shall explain before, we had 3 experimental conditions, 3 treatments. The first is just the baseline that you just saw. In treatment 2, on top of what they saw in stage 2, we told them, we informed every participant of their number of correct answers. Okay, this is very important. Let us think about that. If you consider yourself very knowledgeable in economics, it's very reasonable to select the advisor that you agree a lot. However, if you consider yourself very inefficient, very low in your knowledge of economics, you might not so straightforwardly choose to do that. We will get into that, but it is important to have an idea of where I stand before I choose advisors. Apologies. And then finally, in treatment 3, we have a design where we try to get rid of the potential effects of taking things personally. What do we mean? You might answer a particular question in a certain way, and you are so sure that this is how the question ought to be answered, that this attachment to your answer might drive your choice of advisor. Okay, so we have also a treatment where we try to disengage this part by basically, so in stage 2, they basically see the same screen, but which applies for another participant. So what is the deal here? They know that this is the same questionnaire. They don't, however, know in this particular screen which question is which. So they cannot say what each advisor said in the particular questions that they answered. But they would still see the important things in the structure for choice. They could see how much the advisor tended to agree, each advisor tended to agree on the answers of the other participant. And as I will go on with the discussion, this is sort of the key, because ultimately, you know, this is the thing that should be driving your choice. So which are the hypotheses here? Okay, so this is the same in a little bit of more detail. Max and Amanda, you might tell me how I'm going in terms of time.
Everything's fine. No worries.
Okay, so if you need any more clarification with respect to the 3 treatments, so basically treatment 3, what it tries to do is allow you to choose between the 2 advisors, but without this time being able to identify what they answered in particular questions that you yourself was engaged with. So let me go. Oops, I think it's good time to go to the main hypothesis now, I feel. So what is the idea? Why did we have 3 treatments? The idea is that, very, very simply put, in treatment 1, the populist will be more successful in convincing people that they are the expert. What is the idea here? When people do not have any kind of feedback about how good they are in a discipline, okay, they might tend to be overconfident. That was our prior, and therefore naturally choose to go with the advisor with whom they tend to agree more. Okay, we are all experts, if you wish, in everything. This is part of our part of human psychology, I would say. Okay, so now the question is, okay, so this might be a problem when you have no feedback about how good you are. But what about when you do have feedback, when you know your number of correct answers? Okay, does it simplify things? Does it improve the performance of the expert? Does it make people better at identifying who their true expert is? That was our hypothesis too. Yes, things might go bad in treatment 1, but things will improve in treatment 2 when people know how good they are in the task. Okay, so they won't, if people know that they are particularly bad, they won't tend to be choosing the advisor with whom they agree most, which will tend to be the populist. Okay, let me just mention an important fact. Our calibration of the populist answers was really spot on. The model answer in the pilot was the same as the model answer in the main experiment. So in other words, our prediction about what people will think about in the actual experiment on the basis of the pilot was agreed for every answer. Okay, so it was possible that the populist could predict what people wanted to hear, if you wish. Okay, and finally, we had so we tried, if you wish, to give expertise a chance. Okay, that was sort of the idea. If there is a problem because of the way, if you wish, that the populist chooses answers, let's see if we can have conditions, treatments to address this. And we thought that in treatment 3, this would go a step even further, because in treatment 3, not only do people know their number of correct answers, but on top of that, they don't have the ego involvement. So when you know your particular answer for a question, okay, you get, in some sense, you invest on this particular answer. So when somebody disagrees with you on a particular topic, you might easily reject them. We even get rid of this channel, if you wish, in treatment 3. Okay, so our hypothesis was that treatment 3 would further increase the popularity of the expert to make it higher than either treatment 2 or treatment 1. Okay, so our model was basically a very simple Bayesian model. We had the natural, I'm not going to get into the technicalities, it's a straightforward Bayesian model. The prior is a natural 50-50 between the two. You have no idea who JM is, you have no idea who M is on the basis of this prior. And on the basis of the elicited priors for each individual question, remember, we have this evidence because we elicited it for every question. Okay, so we estimate standard Bayesian model. So people who would have the appropriate posterior would tend to choose the expert. People who had a posterior that did not exceed 1/2, depending on how we define things, would tend to choose the populist. Okay, so there's nothing really, particularly deep here. But I would like to emphasize that even in this, at least seemingly complex problem, things become overwhelmingly simple in treatments 2 and 3. So this is something that people have great difficulty figuring out, even in presentations. So it's worth discussing a little bit further. So let's think about condition 2. Let me get this ugly expression out. So in condition 2, you know how many correct answers you have. Okay? And then I'm going to ask you which one of the 2 advisors you choose. You know that one of the 2 advisors is always right. Okay? And the only other evidence that you basically have is the number of questions in which you agree with each advisor. So this is the ultimate criterion. And it went in the formula before. I don't want to really bother too much with the technicalities. These imply, although it's not obvious, that there is a straightforward solution to the problem of expert advice. And despite this fact, people failed to choose the expert substantially, and they did even worse than choosing by chance. What is the straightforward solution? Since I have 3 correct answers, all right, and one of the people answers everything correctly, there must be at least one advisor with whom I have 3 common answers. And if there is just one advisor with whom I have the 3 common answers, apologies, this must be the expert. That's it. So it's not, I know, however, that this is not straightforward, but the prediction simplifies substantially by this. Okay. So on top of everything else, in our last 2 conditions, there is a simple logical rule that people could have used to understand who the expert is. So let me say a few things before getting into results, because time is passing. And so basically, in our pilot, we had 120 participants from Wales and England. In our main experiment, 600 people. The average duration was 16 minutes. We incentivized it by an average payment of £5, British pounds, and the recruitment was done with the online platform Prolific Academic that specializes in recruitment for academic studies, and we pre-registered the study. Okay, so basically, this is a summary of our results. In all treatments, this is the main result, the populist prevails. And this is even so, there are only 2 candidate answers. Okay, so people do worse than choosing by chance, systematically. Adding information on own performance, so dealing with the issue of overconfidence, does improve things. Okay, so it reduces significantly the dominance of the populist in terms of popularity in treatment 2. And further removing ego involvement in treatment 3 did not seem to make an additional difference. Okay, so this hypothesis did not get through. Okay, and finally, when we get to a little bit of the to the interpretation of how people choose at the individual level, our favored explanation is that the psychological tendency to choose, to trust the people with whom you agree with on certain issues is just too overwhelming and difficult to overcome. But before I get to the details, let me just point to this. In this particular environment, where you're faced with one expert and one populist who you know that gives answers, he's designed to give answers similar to the ones that you're going to give. This is a special environment according to which, depending on how accurate you are, you should be choosing often the advisor with whom you disagree more. That's basically the driving force of everything. Okay, remember this rule I told you, that you just choose the advisor who has the same common answers as you, as your number of correct answers. That means oftentimes going with the one that you disagree more. And our interpretation is that this is such a difficult psychological tendency to overcome, going with the one that you agree. So let's go a little bit in our data after the general presentation of the results. The basic demographics: most of our participants were UK nationals. Most had family income exceeding £30,000. Some fraction of those were married. About half were female. The important thing is that these demographics don't seem to be particularly different across treatments. Okay, the average participant was 44. Remember that these are online experiments. That's what explains these demographics. Okay, so some questions. This is the performance in the stage 1 of the questionnaire. Okay, there are some questions where lay people did particularly well, such as questions 4 to 6. Many questions that they did pretty bad. Okay, so in question 3, which I think was the question with the tax, like 80% of the people got it wrong. Okay, although, seemingly it shouldn't have been. And importantly, people's beliefs were also not particularly well calibrated. Actually, although I'm not going to speak about this, I'm not going to have time. For many people, they tended to be more confident on the answers that they were wrong than on the answers that they were right. So it's interesting, indeed. So, but these are the main treatment effects. So this is what you have been waiting for. So in treatment 1, where people know nothing, only 32% of people, less than 1 in 3, choose the expert. Okay, even if they have the obvious heuristic, the obvious solution to the problem that I explained before, more than half of people chose the populist, even in treatment 2. Okay, and this is something that is worth further study. We have a few theories about that. Treatment 2, people seem to be doing even worse than, treatment 3, people seem to be doing even worse than treatment 2. Okay, this requires a little bit of further study, because remember that in treatment 3, people also knew their own, or the performance of the people in the screen on the basis of which they were choosing, okay, the performance of that other person. So they could tell that they should be choosing the one that the third person had as many common answers as the third person's correct answer. Okay, apologies. Treatment 3 is not very user-friendly in explaining. However, this is we think that the overall picture is pretty clear. With only two possible advisors, with full information about the modus operandi of someone who is out there to pamper to your priors and give answers particularly similar to the ones you're likely to give, people cannot undo this tendency and, in some sense, beat the strategy of the populist. So let's go a little bit in more depth. Let's see how much time we could have. So one obvious answer to the question, how do participants tend to decide, is according to the following simple heuristic. Okay, we just name simple heuristic, the very simple one of choosing the advisor with whom they have the most common answers. So this is the benchmark. This is the dominantly popular type of behavior. And let's see how dominant, in fact, it was. Okay. Okay, again, this goes in the same line in treatment 3, although this time with whom they have the most common answer refers to with whom a third person had the most common answers. So this is evidence on asking the question, did people simply tend to behave according to this simple heuristic overwhelmingly? Or was there heterogeneity across treatments? Okay. And ultimately, were they able to beat the tendency to behave according to this heuristic? The answer is the following. In the baseline, where they had no information about their performance and they could not use the simple rule to find the expert that I explained to you, the simple heuristic was very dominant. Okay, so we focus to see how dominant the simple heuristic was. We just focus on, out of the 200 participants in each treatment, we focus just on those who have more common answers with the populist. Okay, simply because checking those who had more common answers with the expert is not an interesting endeavor. We want to see, out of those that have a difficult task to undo the simple heuristic to do the wrong choice, how many managed to go against it? And the answer is that in the baseline, extremely few managed to do that. Okay, so among those for whom the simple heuristic told them to choose the populist, only 17% managed to choose the expert. But things improved, okay, but not incredibly so. They improved in the two conditions where people knew how good they were in answering the questionnaire. Okay, at least at that stage, this is not fully comforting result, but at least is what one would expect. When I know that I'm pretty bad, okay, at least there is some chance that I won't be choosing the one with whom I have the most common answers. Okay, this was not enough to undo, if you wish, fully the dominance of the populist, since they still overwhelmingly were chosen by the majority of the people according to the common heuristic. But still, it was a substantial improvement, as we can see, statistically significant and so forth, relative to the baseline. Okay, so let's see now if we can have a little bit of more information of what happened. So we ran a few simple regressions. So the data that I described summarized most of the important findings. Let me just also mention, now I realized I don't have it in a slide, the model, the explicit Bayesian model, whereby what you choose depending on your priors, did a relatively decent job in treatment 1. People chose according to that Bayesian model in about 68% of the cases. Okay, so our last slides are going to be some simple regressions. The first has as dependent variable the number of correct answers in stage 1. There is not that much there. One would just focus on a significant result on the gender. It seems that males on average provided about half more correct answers in this particular questionnaire. The other variables really don't have any significance. Secondly, again, we have the probability of choosing the expert at stage 2 in a very simple linear probability model. And in this case, we see that even correcting for other factors, treatment 2 makes a difference. Okay, so it increases by about 10% the probability of choosing the expert. Okay, so as we saw also in the raw data. And also it seems that although this is a relatively small sample, you do get significance on being a EU national in the probability of choosing the expert. And of course, we don't have a clear interpretation of this result, and it wasn't pre-registered either. So it's not something that we're very confident that we want to advertise. Okay, so wrapping up and leaving enough time for questions and brainstorming, I guess people might be tempted to ask the question, wow, this seems like a cool, what would ChatGPT answer on this kind of questions? And this is something that we've done a little bit. Of course, this is not part of our main paper, so it's just a little bit of discussion. So given the discussion and the hype with ChatGPT, we've seen that even in formal assessments of other domains, such as medicine, it can be surprisingly good in answering. And therefore, one might ask the question, how well is it performing for our task? Okay, in some sense, we're providing a benchmark. As far as we know, we are the only ones who are doing this in answering the question of whether these sort of platforms are good, have good performance in answering economic questions. And here are the answers when we had actually two different versions of ChatGPT and ChatGPT 4 as well, very similar. And the answer is the ChatGPT's answers are very similar to the Populists, very similar to the average lay person. Okay, so that's so this is agreement with the expert, which is very poor. It's approximately it's actually 5 questions out of 10, like the lay people did, and almost perfect agreement with the lay people. Okay, so again, we're not going to really argue very much unless we have some real experts in the audience, and we would really very much welcome possible discussion and interpretations for that. So we have in a follow-up project this result, and we are trying to interpret and maybe build on our overall design to see where we might go. So, not wanting to take more of the time and lose the opportunity of discussion, let me summarize. Participants in our design fail to identify the expert, even in cases where there is a clear solution where you don't even need to apply a particularly advanced Bayesian reasoning. And the interpretation that we have is that it's a very strong tendency to choose with whom we agree the most. And in our particular environment where you should go against this heuristic, people do not manage to do that generally. Okay, overconfidence does play a role in that, okay, but not completely, not a very big role, and the result is not overturned in general when you deal with overconfidence and ego involvement. Okay, so the overall message is the following. Okay, so even if you know that you are in an environment whereby you might be target of populists or charlatans, that they have the resources to try to predict your answer. Okay, you have all the information that you need. Okay, and you're asked to individually be alert about that and try to undo this tendency in your choice. People tend to be unable to do that. So maybe if we go in the last policy, lesson, in the spirit of the recent discussion about nudges, whether individual choice or policy solutions are the key to resolving issues, it seems that nudges and individual information do not solve the problem of expertise, at least in this particular domain that we have. Thank you so much for your patience, and I hope we have a lively discussion.